Hi guys, it's Debbie. Another month flew by, so it's time to chat about everything I've been watching and what you've been watching recently, so make sure to leave a comment down below. First things first, as I know I'm going to be asked this, I haven't watched Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer isn't out in Italy yet, we have to wait until August 23rd, but I will be of course uploading my review of it as soon as I watch it. But I did still watch quite a few interesting titles this month, so let's check them out. One of the films I really enjoyed watching this month was Tetris, a title I've been putting off for quite a long time because I was kind of fed up of these product origin stories that seem to be popping up everywhere at the moment. It's the trend of the moment. But I decided to give it a go and I loved it. I didn't know anything about the history of the Tetris game, and apparently it was pretty intense, involving offices and licenses in Russia, Japan and the US during the Cold War, where you couldn't exactly just schedule a business trip to Moscow. Taron Egerton portrays a businessman who sees the potential of the game and tries to get involved in its distribution, which is rife with all sorts of disputes and legal and political implications. Highly recommended. Another movie I loved watching this month was Fish Tank, starring a very young Michael Fassbender in one of his first film roles ever. Fish Tank follows a teenage girl in her daily life in her dysfunctional family, always fighting with her mum and friends while constantly training to become a dancer. Michael Fassbender portrays the mum's new boyfriend, who adds chaos to the whole situation. I love how the film defies expectations, and what at first appears just as a repetitive depiction of this teenager's lifestyle soon takes twists I was not expecting, and it is absolutely brutal in some points. Next up, I watched Asteroid City, the new Wes Anderson film, which is just as Wes Anderson as you can get. The film was really predictable in all its quirks. The plot is a sort of story within a story within a story, as we meet a group of actors behind the scenes of their new play, which is Asteroid City, and the film keeps switching between the events inside the play and the actors in their real life. Asteroid City itself is a desert city where a group of people get together for an astrology convention, and they soon all develop different types of relationships, all while something strange from above occurs. I'll leave it at that. As I was saying, this is probably the most Wes Anderson film I've ever seen, but to the point of it nearly being overwhelming. Every single element of the storyline was given second place to all his quirky one-liners and specific colour palettes and toy-like settings and obsessive symmetries. So although I didn't hate it, I'm definitely not going to rewatch it anytime soon, and I think that many had the same feeling as me towards this film, as all the awards hype died out right after its release and it very quickly went to streaming. But if you're a super lover of that specific Wes Anderson style, this film is perfect for you. I've always loved Wes Anderson's style in animation. One of my favourite films of his is Isle of Dogs, and this month I actually decided to rewatch an older animated film of his, Fantastic Mr. Fox, which is just wonderful. Just as in Isle of Dogs, the animals all interact using our way of speaking, but here they also live like us, carry out jobs, they have houses, lawyers, accountants, which of course is hilarious as they're portrayed by woodland animals. The protagonist is Mr. Fox, who starts stealing from local farmers, creating a huge mayhem in his community. If you haven't seen this film yet, I would highly recommend it. I then watched Insidious: The Red Door, which sounded very promising as the story returns to the OG characters of the first films. And the first Insidious films, the first one specifically, are really scary. The Insidious films are based on this concept of a secondary, hidden, demon-ridden realm that some people access and end up being tormented by the figures who dwell in it. I'm going to be honest, the beginning of this new film was scary, but then it just all sort of degenerate in what I can only describe as a Netflix very teen-oriented storytelling, if you get the vibe I'm describing. And as the film progressed, the mood of the entire cinema room changed from silence and screams to literal laughter at many points. I then finally watched Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, which, yes, is as good a film as everybody is saying. Even with all the memes, most of the Shrek films are actually unironically good and hilarious, and these Puss in Boots films, which are a spin-off of the titular character, have the addition of a really good, peculiar animation. In the film, after a lifetime of adventures and fights, the protagonist is at his last of 9 lives and has to come to terms with this while of course having more adventures thrown his way. Kids, adults, everybody's loved this film, and I wouldn't be surprised if it ends up being nominated for Best Animated Film at the Oscars. Then I've mentioned in the past how I've been struggling with watching series because the sheer amount of time that it takes to watch them, and if I do watch them, I prefer like limited series, docu-series. I actually tried to watch the new season of Black Mirror because I'd seen all the previous ones, but I barely made it past the first episode, Joan is Awful, in which a woman sees her daily life being replicated on the sort of Netflix series she watches. I don't know, it just didn't give the ominous feeling of the older season, so I gave up. Should I continue? Let me know. I did actually commit to watching the whole of Under the Banner of Heaven, which everybody had been telling me was depressing and good, and I agree. Yes, it's very dark and not too bad. Andrew Garfield portrays a detective investigating a brutal murder case tied to Mormonism, so along the actual crime investigation there is a big dive into religion and cult-like behaviors, and unfortunately, apparently it's based on a true story. I then watched The Evil Dead Rise. I took a very chaotic approach to this saga. Basically, before this film was released just a few months ago, I knew literally nothing about this saga. I'd only heard the name, but I didn't know anything about it. Then because we were working on the saga at my job, I ended up watching the 2013 film and then the 1987 one, Evil Dead 2, totally randomly. Anyway, of course, then I was curious about this new chapter, and so I finally checked it out. Well, one thing is undeniable about these films. They take gore to the absolute limit. Wherever you can stab, impale, skin, explode, rip, they'll do it. So if that's your thing, go in for it. I actually think the main actress really has the perfect look for horror films. I don't know why. But then I found out she's in The Devil Wears Prada, but I still figured out who she plays. More horror for the month, I watched Terrified, an Argentinian horror film which feels a lot like a sort of urban legend creepypasta concept. It's the story of different people from the same neighborhood who end up victims of scary supernatural events, which I will not reveal to avoid spoilers, but it's very, very, very creepy. I also then watched the scandalously bad Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey, which is currently waltzing its way into my list of worst films of the year. When this film was announced, everybody took it nearly as a joke, as the idea of the Pooh Bear world characters being murderous creatures was funny. But then people started buying this idea as it could potentially turn into something really bizarre. Well, it's definitely bizarre, and I can also kind of see people in the future watching it as a sort of Sharknado style challenge, but it's far from good. The actor made me want to rip my ears out. The way the story is set up is laughable. Even the effects and general design and production is really bad and cheap. The only positive thing that I can think of is that the scary gory bits are kind of scary and gory. And I think that's it for horror. I only watched a short film called Make Me a Sandwich about an abusive husband who is always bossing his wife about and yelling for her to prepare food for him until she loses her temper. I will leave you with the mystery of what happens. I didn't watch any documentaries this month, but I did watch Funeral Parade of Roses, an older Japanese film which is partially set up as a documentary. It's about the underground queer scene of Tokyo in the 60s. This film is very experimental, very visually pleasing, but also very confusing. It skips through different cinematic styles, storylines, but you might also find it interesting because many say this was a huge inspiration for the aesthetic of Stanley Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange. To be honest, I'm really not sure whether this was officially confirmed or we just drew connections after, but the timeline does match and there are some similarities, so let me know what you think of that. I then finally got around to watching Asghar Farhadi's A Separation. I had quite a few of his films on my watch list, and I decided to start from this one as it's one of his most popular titles. And I liked it so much, I now want to slap myself for all the times I praised films like A Marriage Story for what I believed was a near perfect depiction of the hardships of a separation. This film is a joy of screenwriting, and it takes you places you would never have expected. The whole premise of the story starts from the idea of a divorce, with the wife wanting to move abroad with her daughter to offer a better life compared to the current one in Iran, while the husband wants to stay to look after his elderly father. Well, from that premise, so many more complicated ramifications occur. Highly recommended, and of course, course, now I'm even more excited about Farhadi's other works. Another director of whom I've seen very little is Woody Allen, and my friends recommended starting from Cafe Society, as it is a good compromise to ease you into his filmography. And I must say I enjoyed it. Jesse Eisenberg portrays a young man who moves to Hollywood during Hollywood's early years and ends up tying romantic relationships, work relationships, friendships with different people, including Kristen Stewart in a role in which I found her very relaxed and natural. I loved all the overthinking the characters go through, which I've been told is typically Allen, so what should I watch next of his? Speaking of Kristen Stewart, of course I did my usual monthly rewatch of Twilight. One of you last month asked why I put myself through this. Did I lose a challenge? No, it's just simply my guilty pleasure. And unfortunately, as the months pass, I'm dreading more and more the idea of that reboot series they want to make of it. The only other romance-based film I watched this month was Monpura, a Bangladeshi film about a man who is basically forced by his employer to take the blame for a brutal crime and ends up having to live isolated on a remote fisherman's island. But on this island, he meets the daughter of another fisherman and something sparks between the two. Of course, what seems to be like the beginning of a new life for him instead is the bottom step of a huge ladder to climb. The movie is interesting also from a film industry point of view, as apparently it was one of the biggest cinematic successes of all time in Bangladesh, and people loved it because of the realistic depiction of their culture. Moving on, I watched Joyride, a film I was 100% expecting to hate, but it's not actually that bad when you accept the fact that it's meant to be a loud, rude, very rude comedy. This film is way more explicit than I was expecting, and the trailer already teased a lot. It's basically Crazy Rich Asians, but a lot more sex, drugs, and everything in between. It's the story of a group of friends who end up on a trip across China, but of course everything goes wrong. This film is not a sublimely written story. The character development is very limited, but I did end up laughing, and I think that was the point of it. Instead, a film with a completely different vibe was Doubt, starring Philip Seymour Hoffman, one of my favorite actors of all time. In this film, he portrays a priest whose behavior within his school is criticized by a group of nuns who work with him. I'm really trying to avoid spoilers here. The vital element of this film is the acting, the dialogues, which are incredibly impressive. Basically, all the lead actors were nominated for Oscars that year, including Viola Davis, for which I discovered this represented her breakthrough role. I actually then rewatched another Philip Seymour Hoffman film I'd already seen years ago, The Master, in which he portrays the leader of a Scientology-like cult, which Joaquin Phoenix's character is drawn into. When I watched this film back in the day, I knew very little about Scientology, and then over the years I developed a sort of morbid curiosity for it. And now rewatching this film, knowing about their beliefs and tactics and uses, I find it baffling that everybody still today denies that it's based on that. Moving on, we have The Cave of the Yellow Dog, a film about a family living in a rural region of Mongolia, and with the story mostly focusing on the young daughter, with a big plot element being this puppy, this dog that she brings home. If you like films about daily life activities in a context which is completely different from what you usually see on the big screen, if you like films like Nunana with real life people as actors, this film is for you. I then watched Wildflower, a film I decided to watch after those TikTok clips just kept on coming in. This film really split audiences, as it's the story of a teenager who is going through all the usual teenager problems, but who also is feeling a lot of pressure from society and personally by helping a lot at home, as both her parents are intellectually disabled. As I was saying, this film split audiences because on the one hand we have a depiction of a family situation we don't usually see represented on big screen, some struggles we might not acknowledge, while on the other hand some situations were downplayed and depicted through stereotypes. But one thing many didn't know is that the actress who plays the mother is actually neurodivergent in real life. Another movie I watched about tricky family situations is The Burial of Kodjo, a film with an absolutely stunning cinematography. The story is set in rural Ghana and is mostly narrated through the perspective of the family's young daughter, who witnesses what her parents go through before we are then left to understand more about the situation on our own. The story of their drama starts from the discussion of whether they should stay where they are or move into a larger city in hopes of better economic opportunities, and this then leads to various other ramifications. And the depiction of this family story is interwoven with imagery from dreams, visions, folklore, legends. It really is visually striking. Then for some random reason, I ended up watching two completely different films which both feature struggling chefs and this desperation surrounding Michelin stars. One of them is Burnt and the other is The 100-Foot Journey. Burnt stars Bradley Cooper as a chef returning on the very competitive scene after a bout of drug use and bad behaviour led him to leaving it for a while. Of course, returning is hard for everybody, but especially when you're constantly being judged for your past. And this film made me realise how obsessed the high-end restaurants are with this concept of the Michelin star. The quest for the Michelin star also appears in the other film, The 100-Foot Journey, but which takes a very more light-hearted and comedic approach to the topic. In this film, a family moves to France from India and opens an Indian restaurant literally across the street from a fancy French restaurant. And of course, a lot of rivalry ensues, but always with lessons to be learned and friendships and love being built along the way. And last but not least, right at the end of the month, I watched Graduation, a Romanian film about a father who is willing to do everything for his daughter when her chances of finally getting a scholarship, passing her exams and moving abroad for a better life are suddenly all put at risk. This film isn't happy. Actually, on Wikipedia it is literally described as a tragedy. But it's really interesting as it's all about morals, about what some people consider the greater good, about how the chain of I'll help you but then you owe me back often gets you stuck in tricky situations. But with that, we have reached the end of today's list. Of course, I would love to hear what you've been watching, what you think of all these titles I spoke about today. Let me know everything with a comment down below. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.